to this AF8 presentation from Jim Henderson, our District Council Emergency Management Officer. Apologies, I have Mayor Brown, Councillor Todd. Welcome, Councillor Wilson. Is there any others we know of? No. Welcome to the staff, and we'll hand it over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Welcome everyone. So this afternoon I'm going to give a presentation on the Alpine Fault Magnitude 8 program that's been running for the last 8 years. And as we can see up on the screen, we can't predict earthquakes, but we can certainly prepare for them. The AF8 program is designed to build resilience to the next large Alpine fault earthquake. It's a program of scientific research and modelling, coordinated response planning and community engagement. It's regionally led and focused on the impacts that a rupture on the Alpine fault would have for people living in the South Island. So we step out a wee bit. New Zealand sits in the southwest corner of the Pacific Ring of Fire. The Pacific Ring of Fire is where 90% of the world's earthquakes and 80% of the world's tsunamis are generated. It runs around, obviously, up the coast of South America, North America, across to Japan, down round through the Pacific, and then finally pops through the Hikurangi Trench and into the South Island and runs down the Alpine Fault. The Alpine Fault itself is approximately 400 metres long. And it's that length of the straight line that allows it to generate earthquakes of such large capacity.
Jim, are you happy to take questions as we progress?
Yes, certainly.
Jim, when we go back a slide, please. When we look at the Ring of Fire, you have a little shadings, like we used to do at geography when we were kids, so shadings. What does that mean, that sort of surround bit around the line?
That's just indicating where the Pacific Ring of Fire is, so it's not.
So it's not a line.
No, it's just it's indicating where it goes around the Pacific.
Okay, so when we talk about the Alpine Fault, then the red, there's like 10 kilometres either side of that.
The fault itself is quite narrow, so anything within sort of 100 kilometres of the fault is going to will get shaken up quite badly when it ruptures, but the fault itself, it can be anything from a metre wide to 10 metres wide, depending on what part of the fault it's on.
So that relates to my question with regards to the shading around that line. So that could be between 1 kilometre and 10 kilometres, that shading sort of thing.
On the Pacific Ring of Fire one? Yes, it could, yep.
Thank you.
The Alpine Fault, when it passes through New Zealand, so we also have a twisted plate boundary. So in the north, the Pacific plate subducts under the Australian plate. When we come down through the fault, the two plates push against each other. And then when we hit the south, the Australian plate is subducting under the Pacific plate. So subduction just means that one of the plates is going under the other, and it's when they grind up against each other and release, that's when we get the earthquakes. So the Alpine Fault itself, we've known about it for over 80 years. A chap by the name of Harold Wellman was tasked by the government to go and do geological surveys of the South Island during the 1930s, and he discovered he discovered the fault running up the west coast of the South Island. So what you can see here is this is a group of different geological types, and as you can see, the way it changes along the Alpine Fault itself, running from south to north. The other thing that Wellman believed was he discovered two different or two similar types of rock, one of which was in the Tasman area, and it matched geologically red rock in the south, down by Fiordland. And that allowed him to hypothesise that at one stage those two rocks had been side by side, and over millions of years of earthquakes, the South Island had formed how we've seen it now. So looking at the way the earth moves with the earthquakes. It tends to, one is coming south, the other going north, and that's how we've wound up with the South Island the way we've got it looking now. So around about 20 million years worth of earthquake. Up until recently, until they started this program in around 2016, we knew that we'd had 3 large earthquakes on the Alpine Fault. The chart that you see in front of you with the years along the top and bottom show us where those earthquakes had occurred. And so in the last 2,000 years, we know we'd had 3, and that was based on evidence that was found in around Harston in South Westland. With further evidence discovered in John O'Groats in South Westland and Hokuri Creek in South Westland also, we were able to prove that there has been 27 earthquakes over the last 8,000 years. So, and these earthquakes have been of a very, they come regularly at around about that 300-year mark. This was done via carbon dating. So when an earthquake occurs, it blocks the creeks up and the sediment settles. They can't get down to the exact year, so they can't tell you that an earthquake happened in 2104 BC, but they can give you within 300 or 400 years of that. And that, in geology, that's quite accurate. They took also core samples from a number of lakes along the central part of the Alpine Fault, and also carbon dated off those sediment samples taken, and they were able to once again prove that we've had these earthquakes. So all of the evidence put together told us that the Alpine Fault's got a long history of large earthquakes. They're remarkably regular, and there's no reason they won't continue. They have an average recurrence interval of about every 300 years, and the last significant earthquake was in 1717 AD. So we are well within the window now, and as you can see down the bottom there, just highlighted now, there's a 75% probability of the next one of these earthquakes occurring in the next 50 years, and an 82% chance it will rupture on multiple sections of the fault and be in magnitude 8 plus. So there are people who do argue about this, and fair enough. It would need to go on multiple sections of the fault to generate an earthquake of magnitude 8 size. If it only went on one section, then you're still going to get a reasonably large earthquake in that magnitude 7 kind of area. One of the things that everybody asks, I've done this presentation a few times now, is what's it going to feel like? So magnitude, we have 2 ways of measuring earthquakes. Magnitude, which is science, and it looks at the amount of energy that's released at the hypercenter of the earthquake, and the other one is the modified Mercalli intensity scale, or MMI, and that's kind of those felt reports. So if we have a look, it's useful when we compare it. Magnitude is a logarithmic scale, so every time the magnitude goes up, it releases obviously more energy. So the Christchurch magnitude 6.2 earthquake that happened on February 22nd, represented here by this dot. The earthquake that had happened in Darfield, which was 4 months before that in the October, it released 22 times more energy than the Christchurch earthquake. The Kaikoura earthquake was a magnitude 7.8 in 2016. It released 251 times more energy than Christchurch. The magnitude 8 Alpine Fault would release 500 times the energy of the Christchurch earthquake and twice the amount of the Kaikoura earthquake. So we can, for most of us, we can remember what those felt like. This will give us some idea of the kind of shaking we'll have. And the other thing to remember is the Christchurch earthquakes and the Kaikoura earthquake were of reasonably short duration, so 20 to 30 seconds. The shaking from the Alpine Fault will go on for 5 to 6 minutes for the South Island, and approximately 2 minutes of that here in our district. So MMI, or the Modified Mercalli Intensity Scale, this measures the intensity of earthquakes, and anyone who's ever filled out a felt report for GNS science, that's what you're actually talking about there. Where you're, so it's not scientific, it's basically people saying how they felt the earthquake. from a of 4, so it goes from 1 through to 12. We use 4 through to 10 because that's what we think or the scientists think that the Alpine Fault will generate for the South Island. So the of 4 largely observed, so that's generally everybody felt it and felt the earthquake, right through to an of 10, and that's where many buildings are damaged and most weak buildings are destroyed. And we can overlay that onto a map of the South Island based on the shaking that they're predicting. So the shaking intensity, so this on the right hand side, as we're looking at it, that's obviously the South Island and the footprint that we would have from a south to north rupture on a central rupture on the Alpine Fault. If we compare that, once again, drawn to scale, what the 4th of September 2010 Darfield earthquake looked like, so it was a magnitude 7.1, that's the actual footprint drawn to scale of what that looked like. And February 22nd, 2011, so that was a magnitude 6.3, once again, drawn to scale. So if you can remember what those felt like, compare the colours that you're looking at. So the green is that of 6, the through 7 and 8, and then have a look at what we are likely to experience. And as you can see, the whole South Island will feel this earthquake, and Canterbury is certainly going to be in that destructive kind of area. So we will be just starting to close into that. We'll have buildings down, those sorts of things. What this allowed, sorry.
Just go to Hamish with a question.
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jim, I wonder when you're thinking about how much damage the earthquake does, or even how it's felt. And my understanding from Christchurch was the depth of the centre of the earthquake and the vertical movement versus the horizontal was a big part of why it was so destructive. And so that the Richter scale is fine to talk about the release of energy, but it wasn't the material thing that drove the way in which the earthquake impacted. Is there any comparison between that sort of destructive capability of earthquakes that we perhaps have experienced compared to what might happen with the Alpine Fault? I.e., is it really shallow or is it really deep? Is it likely to be horizontal or is it going to have that vertical motion?
That's a great question. Thanks, Hamish. And as a non-scientist, as we understand it, so Christchurch February earthquake, it had, as you spoke about, large vertical and horizontal movement, and it moved really quickly, and that was the kind of jolt that caused the damage on that particular quake. The Kaikoura and Darfield quakes were both rolling earthquakes, and the AF8 rupture would be similar to that. So it's a rolling kind of earthquake of a long duration. It would be the depth. I'm unaware of what depth they're talking about, but what we're being told by the scientists is that anybody within 100 kilometres of the epicenter or the hypercenter of the quake will definitely experience large shaking. And we have the demo coming up shortly, which will give people an idea of kind of what that will look like. But definitely a rolling quake rather than a jolt like you felt in Christchurch in February.
Another question from Lane.
Jim, just the slide before, it's only the South Island. Is it not going through to Wellington, or is it completely different?
No, it will. So the Alpine Fault, if you remember back to the initial slide, the Alpine Fault curves away once it gets up around North Canterbury, and it heads out towards Seddon, so it pops back out at Seddon, and then joins the Hikurangi Trench. The shaking will, much the same as Kaikoura, if it ruptures from the south to the north, then the shaking will continue into Wellington, yes. There hasn't been a lot of work done studying that because in the North Island they also have they've been focusing on the Hikurangi Trench, which is that's a major issue for them up there as well.
Those red spots you've got on there, Jim, are they ruptures, or is that, I see you're talking about the epicenter with the star.
Yes.
That graph there, is that multiple ruptures as well, or is that?
So off that, yes, it's ruptured and it's gone out. Off this picture here, or this representation, you are getting a magnitude 8 rupturing on the centre of the fault and heading out both ways. So the red spots that you're seeing are places where, because of the geological makeup of the rock and in those areas, that's why you're seeing the destructive power of it. Yes.
Carolyn?
When we had the AF8 presentation, Jim, you talked about it coming up from the bottom, and we had X amount of minutes, 2 minutes or 3 minutes. If that's the epicenter, why is it coming up from the bottom?
So in this particular representation, we've looked at a central rupture. So if I go forward, so we've got 3 different scenarios here that the scientists came up with. So perhaps this will answer your question, Councillor.
Thank you, it does.
We had 3. What the science did was it then brought up with 3. It allowed us to inform our response planning. It gave us 3 different scenarios. The worst for the South Island is a south to north rupture. So that's the one that we've concentrated on for our response planning. There is obviously one for a rupture on the central section and one on the northern section. Each of them will be a fairly significant earthquake and a lot of shaking for the South Island. And incidentally, if you have a look at the 3 maps there, Ashburton District will get the same type of shaking and intensity regardless of where this goes. So one of the things that makes us such a wonderful place to farm with our alluvial shingles and that kind of stuff and well-draining soils also makes us quite susceptible to large earthquakes and shaking. So the response planning that we have done looked at a south to north rupture, which is the worst case scenario for the South Island. It's a magnitude 8, MM intensity of between 4 and 10. The cascading consequences and secondary hazards, which we'll talk about shortly, and obviously really significant damage, human, environmental infrastructure and economic impact for the whole of the South Island and indeed for New Zealand. So the south to north rupture scenario, which is the one that we've built it on, exposed to an MMI of 7 to 10. So if you have a look there at the colours that we're looking at, Canterbury has that, or Ashburton District has that damaging into that heavily damaging area. There's a couple of parts there that are heavily damaged. And remember, this is scenario based, so it's science looking at the scenario and giving us their best efforts at what it would be like. No scenario ever kind of survives the actual start of the quake. So they're saying that there'll be 360,000 residents in the South Island affected, 1,200 kilometres of road and 390 kilometres of our electricity transmission lines also damaged. So if you have a look, here's the animation we spoke of, rupture time in the top right corner. It started at in the south and southwestland. Where you see it jumping up like that, that's the peak ground velocities that Hamish was alluding to earlier in his question. And as you can see down in the south, there is some really large ground velocities. And as it travels up the fault, it becomes more and more of a rolling earthquake. It enters into our district at around about 1 minute 50, and we'll experience a couple of minutes of shaking from there. With our peak ground velocities in that 4 to 8 centimetres per second. In fact, once the epicentre of the quake has gone past us, we're still shaking for a significant amount of time after it's left our district. So the epicentre is well past us now and heading towards the actual top of the fault, and the shaking still here. For Councillor Ellis, you get the last of it on behalf of our district, so out of the Rakaya huts there. So that the shaking's headed off the map, obviously gone through Cook Strait now and is heading, so Wellington is being affected now, although not a lot of study has gone into what that looks like. For any of us that have gone and stayed in Wellington, I wouldn't want to be there when this hits, is the way I'll say it. So a 5-minute simulation there of what the rupture could look like. So for the Canterbury region, we've got the on the right hand side there what the MMI, so we're talking about that damaging onto heavily damaging within our district, some patches of that, once again because of our soils. It's the one that we've used, MM 5 to 8 across the Canterbury region. To sum it up, we're all going to feel it. We'll all be impacted in different ways, but we can prepare for it.
Richard, is that dot, is that Ashburton, is it?
It's west of Ashburton, but I don't know where. I'm not 100% sure where it is, Council.
Yep.
But there's that one dot, and once again, it's a representation, and there'll be something to do with the type of rock or soil that we have there that makes it particularly susceptible to the quake. So we all know earthquakes. It's not just the initial ground shaking. There's a series of secondary hazards. So we get the quake. It'll cause landslides, and not so much for us down here on the flat, but for the gorges, Rakaya and Ashburton, there would be there's expected landsliding up there, and our response planning for those areas are to get the road open so that we can allow movement. Landslides can cause quake lakes. We saw this in Kaikoura. We will see it on the likes of the west coast and closer to the foothills. We let those go, and we have dam break floods within our own regions. Once again, not really susceptible to that down here on the flat, but parts of our district are. Other things, aftershocks. So we all remember the aftershocks from Christchurch. There would be, for a magnitude 8 earthquake, you could expect tens of magnitude 7, hundreds of magnitude 6, and thousands upon thousands of magnitude 4 and 5 earthquakes, which are significant size quakes in themselves, and those will go on for many years afterwards. And every time we have a large quake, we obviously have to reset again, causing more damage. Earthquakes don't cause weather events, but if you're living in a house that's taken a bit of damage, obviously the effects of the weather are exacerbated. Our stop banks, liquefaction along the sides of the rivers, stop banks sit within those liquefaction areas, so there's that additional risk that we could have. And once again, earthquakes don't cause fire. Well, possibly can, but they're not saying they cause it, but difficulty for responders to be able to get into areas if there is a fire. So our roading network exposure, all of our passes pass through this steep landslide prone terrain. There's little redundancy in our network, so the west coast would be cut off for a significant period of time until they can get the landslips moved or open up new areas. So on the map here you can see you've got the landsliding on the first slide, then we overlay the roads from there, and anywhere you can see red, that's showing you where the roads will be closed. So in effect the west coast will be cut off from the east coast for a period of time until we can get the roads repaired. Much the same with the electricity networks. So pylons and poles damaged. We don't hold a lot of stock in New Zealand to repair those, so a lot of that's got to come in from other places. Damage to transformers. The dams themselves are designed to shut down on a large seismic event, and the reason for that is that they are machined to such fine tolerances that they would need to check them to make sure that they are okay before they restart them. It takes power to restart them, so they're working on that as well. And then you obviously have the transmission network from there. So we could be without power for a significant amount of time until we can get everything generating again. It also has implications for the North Island supply, and I believe they're either put a second cable in or they're putting a second cable into to the North Island to try and build some resilience into that. As you can see, blue down where we are, not so power down here, we'll be able to transmit it. It's getting it from the transmitters themselves to us, which will be difficult. Telecommunications, we all understand. Priorities now, electricity and communications, telecommunications, to get people connected again. That's a kind of a priority for most controllers now. With telecommunications out, it'll make it very difficult to communicate. The loss of electricity means that we won't have our communications that we have, so we've got to work hard on our backup communications for response planning. So our key messages that we need to get out there. The Alpine Fault, the next one, is inevitable. There's a very high chance it's going to be a magnitude 8. Scenario earthquakes are not quite what is experienced, as I pointed out. There were direct and indirect impacts across the South Island and Lower North Island, widespread secondary hazards. There'll be a lot of isolation for long periods of time and extended service outages, and that's our power, our water, phones, those kind of things will be out. Communication networks will be tested. We need to have strong pre-existing networks, and to do that's essential. We can't predict them, but we can prepare. We've all got a part to play, and anything we do now would make a significant difference in this event when it happens. I think Jane Donaldson summed it up the best when she was questioned by someone at the very first time we had this presentation, when she stated that the key message to get out there is that there's probably no one coming to help you, you need to help yourself. And I think that's a key message we want to try and get across to everybody in our district, is that the emergency services, civil defence, everybody will be overwhelmed looking after people who are sick and injured after this earthquake. So we're not going to have the capability or the capacity to respond to people who are okay. They're going to have to look after themselves. So how do we prepare? There's some good places to start on the right-hand side there. So a number of websites. So there's the getready.govt.nz. Some excellent preparedness statements on there and things that we can do to get ourselves ready. Neighbourhood support here in Mid-Canterbury also has a great website. Signing up to that is it's simple to do. Nelson Tasman's CDM website has some good information on it, and EQC has good information as well. But talking with friends and neighbours about being prepared and how you can support each other, this is one of those ones where the neighbourhood can become the team and everyone can work together, because I might have a generator and you might have additional water and someone else might have something else, and if we come together as neighbourhoods, then it'll make us more resilient to this. Make an emergency plan with our family or our household and practice it. We've talked about where to go for the information. NEMA has recently working with Radio New Zealand, so they would be giving regular updates to areas without power, so you only have to turn your radio on at certain times to be able to pick it up. Everyone's got a radio in their car, so that's radio is going to be the key way of getting information out. Have an emergency kit, refresh it every 6 months. We're now saying enough food and water and supplies for at least 7 days. So 7 days is the new thing. 10 days if you live in a rural area. So 7 is for the urban, 10 for rural. Maximise our resources by working with others. Quake safe our home. Not so much have a getaway and go bag. I wouldn't expect everyone to have that ready to go at home, but know where the things that you need to put in your bag are, so that you can call on them quickly if you need to grab a hold of them. And what needs to go in a getaway and go bag, available on any of those websites. And find out about natural hazards in our area. Well, this presentation is telling us about one of our major hazards that we have within our area. So, that completes the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jim. Questions, councillors?
Richard, what's our role in the AF8 tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock? We're not here. What's our role?
For councillors?
Councillors, yep.
Have a huge role to play. The ability to get information from your constituents. You've got relationships and networks within the community that I don't have, that none of us have. You'll know people. Our biggest thing that we're going to have when the AF8 hits is that lack of information. It's the same as what happened with Gabrielle. Dare I say it, and a horrible thing to say, but it was a minor scale rehearsal for us of what it's going to be like. Networks that you've got, information that you can gather, passing that on to us in the EOC, and feeding our messages back out is a really key thing that all councillors will be able to do.
Carolyn?
It's very imprecise science, isn't it? This, and we're worried about it because we're overdue, as I understand from your previous presentation. But have they developed any further along the scientific track to give us an ETA of whether we're going to get it in the next 20 years or 50 years? All we can know is we're overdue. I mean, they all say there's a 95% chance we're not going to get an earthquake in the next 5 years, so that means there's a 5% chance we're going to get one. So when you look at the risk-benefit of those, you know...
It was interesting reading the Mataparai report into Cyclone Gabrielle, and one of the key things that was put across and has been picked up by the government is that every New Zealander at some time in their life will experience a major disaster. That's we are, when it comes to the insurance, the reinsurance, I believe that we are one of the most risky countries in the world with what we face in the way of our earthquakes and our climate, and that's all being exacerbated obviously with...
can I ask one more question, please? I understand that today is about the AF8 and understanding what the ramifications of that are, but we've also seen Cyclone Gabrielle and other big, rain events that are massive, and we've had our own a few months ago. I understand the river hasn't been remediated. I think I read somewhere in the last ECAN thing. What is the risks associated with that? Say we have a big rainfall. Is that presumably not as disastrous, but potentially could be, or do we have any feel for that?
So a great question. We work regularly with ECAN, constantly getting updates from them. They're part of our district liaison committee, so we have one of the flood controllers joins us for that every 6 months just to take us through. They have done a lot of work in the rivers. They've spent a lot of money in the rivers. There's a lot of shingle being taken out of the rivers, so I believe they're doing everything that they can with the resources that they've got. And with things like stop banks and our groins and those sort of things that they've got in there, all of those things take time to regenerate. I think after the May 21 floods, I read a report that said some of the infrastructure that broke could take up to 10 years to completely regenerate back to the standard we had before the floods. So, yeah, like everything, it's time.
Yeah, thank you.
Russell?
Thank you. Thank you, I think, Jim. Any of the modelling show what happens to our bridges, the Rangitata, Rakaia and Ashburton, because we're very vulnerable there. I mean, we've got Burnham military camp just up the road, but if they can't cross the Rakaia River to get here to help us, we are very much on our own in that scenario.
Yes, so the latest understanding is that the bridges themselves were engineered to a very high standard. There was a bit of a, I think most of us come from that generation where the Ministry of Works was sort of looked at as a bunch of shovel leaners, but from what I understand, the engineering that they did on the power plants, the bridges, were at a very, very high standard. They almost over-engineered them, so that there is a belief that the bridges themselves will survive the shaking. It's the abutments leading up to the bridges because they move in different ways. So to repair an abutment is some heavy machinery and some time, but from what I understand and what we're being told, the bridges will stand up to this okay.
Rob?
Thank you. You indicated that stop banks could be breached, etc. If the scenario was we had an earthquake and we had a bit of a wet period of time at the same time, and our stop bank breached west of town here, and we've already seen with flood events it's always a risk. If it breached above town, we're in trouble for the water to come straight through our town. Has it ever been looked at that we have a secondary channel if that so happened as a backup? if it breached, then the water goes into a channel instead of straight into town.
I'm not sure, I can't answer that. It's certainly a question I could ask, but I'm not aware of any secondary channel that is in place for a break off Jessop's Corner, no.
You've said, as Jane Donaldson said, that we're on our own effectively. How does that work when everybody's based in either Ashburton or Christchurch, and us poor people at Hines have got a couple of bridges to get across and a couple of things to get up? We'd be on our own, because that was the problem last time. The cell phone just died immediately because the person had to come from Auckland just about to turn the generator on Hines. So has that been sorted out better so that there's local people can go to the cell phone tower and can sort it out, or is it still the same as what it was? They ran out of fuel, for God's sake. That was what happened up north, didn't it?
It was, yeah.
Which is just ridiculous at the extreme. When you have people that live in the area, this volunteer fire brigade could walk and put some fuel in it and keep it going. So has that been sorted, or is that still just as vulnerable?
Ongoing conversations with Chorus, and as a result of the review into the North Island severe weather events, the telcos and other infrastructure service providers have been asked to strengthen what they're doing. So we have a representative from Chorus on our liaison committee. Constant conversations with him, and he's a good man who. I'm confident that he's a lateral thinker, and that we would be able to do those kind of things. We've certainly had that conversation with the likes of Mayfield Fens, being able to refuel generators up that way, and providing them access to do that. So common sense things like that. I think we're ahead of the game on now. Yeah.
And the next question, another one. So it's on communication again. Elon's, what's it called?
Starlink.
Yep. Has there ever been any work done on getting a network of Starlinks across the district, rather than just you having one and Hamish having access to one, and that's it? When there's many ones out on farms and different places, has there ever been any work done of almost people getting a register of where they are, so that then you actually have a very sound communication network?
We don't have a register of where private Starlink devices are. We hold two here at ADC, which are deployable and can be deployed anywhere within the district, and we rehearse with those regularly, and have a number of people trained up on how to set them up. I'm always quite proud to say that my 70-year-olds and my volunteer group can set up a Starlink, and that's great that they've got that capability. Starlink's not the answer to everything. It's another tool that we can use to help us, but it still needs access to ground stations and that kind of thing. So I believe it's definitely a tool we can use, but I don't think it's the answer to all of our questions. But the idea of finding out who's got them within the district, I'm not sure from a privacy standpoint how that would go, but it's certainly worth asking the question, I suppose.
Just before Carolyn, has there been any modelling done around loss of life, Jim?
There has, but it's very granular. So it's not something that any of us hang our hats on, and there's been even less work done on that than's been done on the scenario for the Alpine Fault. So it's one of those awful things that we've kind of got to just play what's in front of us. On the day, it will depend on the type of shaking, buildings that come down, any of that kind of thing, and that kind of stuff we can't predict.
Yeah, I get. Yeah, it's such a if it's
an absolute moving feast.
Middle of the workday, then it's going to be a lot more than middle of the night. Carolyn,
Lynette Lovett is watching online, and she sent me a question. When are we going to ramp up neighbourhood watch around the rural areas? Thinking about getting to know out your neighbours in case of an event. Sort of a comment question, but it's from Councillor Lovett.
It is it's certainly something that neighbourhood support are working on. So I'm regularly working with Sue Abel. Whenever we go to visit any of the rural communities, there's a group of us that go. Civil Defence, Fens, St John's, and neighbourhood support. We visit all of our rural communities as much as we can throughout the year. So we've done 5 visits this year, and we've got 1 more to go out to Mayfield. And it's a chance. We invite everybody to come in. We invite people to sign up. Once again, it's freedom of choice. People if they choose to sign up to neighbourhood support, great. If they don't, there's not a lot that we can do to force people. There's about 11,000 people signed up within the district now to neighbourhood support, so a third of our residents, which is great. The more the better.
And question from me, can I ask another question, Phil?
Yeah.
Do we have little caches, is that the word, C-A-C-A-G, caches, or how do you say it?
Cash. Yep,
Caches of water and instant noodles or whatever around the district?
No. So that kind of resilience is individual. So that's why our messaging is make sure you've got enough food for 7 days and enough water for 7 days, and your prescriptions for a minimum of 30 days. All of those things. That's individual resilience. That's the part that we need to strengthen the most within New Zealand. So emergency management is myself and my team behind me here planning for what we're going to do at a larger scale within the district. Civil defence itself is what individuals do. It's what people do. It's what neighbourhoods do. It's what small communities do to make themselves resilient and ready.
Because no matter whatever you say and whatever you plan, a lot of people don't believe it's going to happen, so they... Yeah.
No plan ever survives contact with the enemy, I've been told.
Jim, I just see on Facebook, Hazel's asking if there are links to any more information. Did you have a slide with some links on it? Could you go back to that
yep,
one
sure.
for Hazel? So that's coming up on screen. So getready.gov.
.govt.nz. Also, council, so if you go to ashburtondc.govt.nz, there's links on there that'll take you out to all of the government websites as well. So we've got some thorough preparatory messages on our website as well. But these places are other places you can go to get them.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Sorry to ask too many questions. Is there an emergency month in the year? You know, we've got Pharmacist Day and Nurses Day. Is there an emergency day?
We have a number of different activities that are conducted at different times during the year. So we've got the shakeout, national shakeout drill is coming up. So that's the national earthquake drill, 24th of October. So October is kind of earthquake month. And there's also the tsunami hikoi can happen during this month as well. There will advertising campaigns focus throughout the year. So the emergency mobile alert normally happens in May. That's when your phone goes off and wakes you up in the middle of the night, or with the 3 phones you carry. It's when your wife finds out if you've got the secret phone or not.
And as a council, we do something to hook onto those, like you'd put it on the front page of the website or whatever to create awareness.
Yep, our fantastic communications team are always getting that kind of information out to people.
Would appear your wife's watching too, by the way, Jim. Heads up.
She's trying to find out how many times I say
422.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you once again. Very informative and, as one person has said, slightly scary. But as mentioned, better to be prepared. So once again, appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, councillors.